空気は煙と電車が通るほど向かいのコンビニのちっちゃい黒猫一緒に歌作ろう一緒にバナナ食べよう小さい頃のお写真君の大事なメモリー
Remind me to explain in about 2 or 3 minutes what that song is and why we're using it today. But what we're talking about today, it's all kind of inspired by Spencer Kornhaber, who's been with us on previous shows. And he's now put out in the Atlantic, very much talked about. One might say viral, one might not say viral. Article in the Atlantic called "Is This the Worst Ever Era of American Pop Culture?" And of course, we had to go and grab at that thread and tug on it really hard. So what we're going to do today is that Spencer Kornhaber is going to be here with us in the first segment. Some of the members of our regular Nose panel will be there in the second segment. The third segment, we'll just make some recommendations, including maybe that you get some help. No, they'll mainly be TV and music and stuff like that. Anyway, Spencer Kornhaber, staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of On Divas, Persona, Pleasure, and Power, rejoins us. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
So I'm going to ask you, do you get what the joke is of this song that's playing right now?
Yes, this is May Simones, who's a bossa nova, Japanese-American, stuffed animal loving artist who is mentioned in my article.
Yes, Ted Gioia, who's one of the big interviewees in your article, mentioned. I do want to say with a certain amount of perverse pride, this is the second time we've used that song on our. We used it back in March, too, just to use it because we liked it.
So ahead of the curve.
Ahead of the curve. And you're 37. I'm 70. But so I belong to the most calcified blinkered generation ever. As you kind of hint at in your article, the baby boomers, they're the beginning of rock and roll. They thought creativity began then. This is a generation that, for the most part, was taught that, George Gershwin had nothing for them. There's no reason to care about Cole Porter. Anyway, let's begin by having you make the general case. I should say also, I'll declare in advance, I think I'm not a declinist. At least not this week, anyway. Just make the general case for your argument.
Yeah, I don't think I'm a declinist either, especially after talking about this article with people since it's come out. You get more and more examples of reasons to be hopeful. But basically, I know that declinism and pessimism is sort of like part of my profession, part of my professional tradition as a music critic or culture critic. Every generation produces a narrative about why it's the end times or the worst time to be alive or the worst culture and how things were better when we were all much younger. So I've tried to fight against that for as long as I've been working, try to kind of embrace sort of the new and the strange and things that might seem, try to look for the good in things that might seem tawdry or like signs of decline. But in the past few years, I would say since the start of the pandemic, culture's gotten really quite strange, and the job became a bit more, just the job that I've been doing has become stranger, where you didn't always know what you were supposed to, quote unquote, should be writing about any given week. The big narratives, the big movies, the albums that everyone was talking about, those were just harder to identify over the past few years. And at the same time, you just see so much complaining and cultural commentary. A lot of critics just have been reiterating this narrative that something has gone wrong in the culture. And not only that, but I would go on things like TikTok and see younger people talking about how they feel like they were born in the wrong generation. And so it felt like this was reaching a critical inflection point as far as the mood of the culture was just becoming very pessimistic. And I wanted to dig into the real reasons why. Conversations about cultural decline can often become so subjective. It's pitting your generation's idols against your parents' generation's idols and just, debating who's better. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to talk about the real structural forces that are causing people to feel alienated from the culture they live in.
Right. And we should say, I mean, one reason to say this is because, as you're suggesting, people say this according to a recent YouGov poll. This is from your article. Americans rate the 2020s as the worst decade in a century for music, movies, fashion, TV, and sports. It's, I think, open to question how many centuries those people actually, or decades and centuries those people actually have any access to. But so one of the arguments is when we look, I think the most endangered species in this argument are probably movies. You may feel differently. You may say music, but movies partly because the actual in-theater audience has kind of gone away. The production costs are still high, and they have access to a lot more data. They're smart enough to know how to get repeat business. But I don't know. Say a little bit about. I have a counter argument to that, but say a little bit about how you feel about that.
I agree that movies are the perfect storm of things going awry. I mean, so my piece is kind of organized around 4 big themes or forces, and I would say that they are all hurting movies perhaps the most. And those forces being stagnation, which is the feeling like nothing's new and everything is just a reboot. That's definitely Hollywood's approach to making profit these days is just remixing and spinning things off. Cynicism, which is sort of a political an idea that culture has become too politicized or too focused on identity, which you can debate, but which I don't think you can really debate, is that a lot of audiences have become alienated from their culture, distrustful of it. They feel like they're seeing propaganda everywhere, and so you have a big portion of the country like sitting out Disney now because they think Disney's too woke, and so that's having a malign effect on the movie industry. You have isolation, which is just the idea that everyone is staying at home, scrolling on their phones, rather than going out and interacting with the world and connecting over culture in real life spaces. Obviously, the one example of that is the falling attendance for movies and movie theaters. And then you have acceleration with the feeling that there's too much. And it's sort of, we're distracted all the time. We have this concept of brain rot. We can't pay attention to a full length movie without checking our phones. And so, yeah, all of these forces, I think, are hitting movies really hard to where it just doesn't feel like the central cultural medium it did for a while. But what I would say is that there's also, this creates a sort of fallow area that's allowed for some very interesting things to bubble up over the past few years.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that as we go along. I do, when sort of people say, well, it's all reboots. Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, His Gal Friday is a great movie. It's a reboot of The Front Page, and the front page and the front page. The movie is a reboot of a play that came before it. And in the 1970s, Billy Wilder directed Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in The Front Page. In fact, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in Something was kind of a constant reboot for a while. And in 1988, Die Hard has this incredible moment of popularity, and then you just get Die Hard on X. You get Die Hard on a ship, and that's Under Siege, and Die Hard on a mountain, and that's Cliffhanger, and Die Hard on a prison plane, and that's Con Air. And I could go on and on. The Die Hard on a prison island, that's The Rock. So, I mean, Hollywood is always trying to recapture the lightning that got out of the bottle and put it back in and do it again. But it does seem like these other factors that you're talking about, a kind of disengagement by the audience, a kind of not caring so much, is also part of the stagnation, maybe.
I think that's right. And it makes it so that Hollywood becomes even more desperate and more craven and more likely to invest in the safest possible things. I mean, you're right that recycling and rehashing and kind of doing cover versions of old stories is a tale as old as time. It's something that culture creators have done for millennia. But I think in very concrete ways, if you look at the top grossing, if you look at the box office numbers for like the past year, all of the top 10 basically have numbers in the title because they're all sequels. And then that was not the case if you go back to like a year like 1996, where you have films like Independence Day, Twister, Mission Impossible 1, The Rock, The Nutty Professor, The Birdcage. That's a variety of blockbuster mainstream movies that were original products. In just a couple of decades, that sort of movie has fallen by the wayside to a huge extent. And I do think it's because of these other factors that we're talking about, making Hollywood even more panicked and scared to invest in interesting ideas.
Yeah, it's certainly true in the 90s because it was sort of a great time because of Miramax and Gramercy and New Line. You got Pulp Fiction, Fargo, Boogie Nights, Good Will Hunting, The Big Lebowski, The Blair Witch Project. You did get people making really interesting stuff, even as the bottom line tended to still dominate the calculations of Hollywood executives. I will also say on a positive note, I was walking this morning with a group of people I walk with every morning, and they're of all kinds of different ages and backgrounds. And Olivia, who is an undergraduate at Holy Cross, has seen Sinners 3 times now in the movie theater. Now, Sinners kind of fails the woke test, or I mean, it's Pete Hegseth probably is not going to go to it, or if he does, he won't tell anybody. But there's Ryan Coogler, a pretty interesting vision there. He's also got an interesting business vision. He figured out if he leaves it in the hands of the studios or whoever, that's not a good thing. So he's getting the rights back. I mean, you could look at Sinners and say, maybe we should feel a little bit encouraged by a thing that's as successful as that.
Yeah, every year you have a couple shining examples of things going against the trend and proving there's still life in this art form. And often those things come from directors in Hollywood who have gotten enough clout over the years to, take their blank check, as people say, or do the creative project, take the big swing that they wouldn't have been allowed to make earlier in their career. And I think that's definitely what Ryan Coogler has done. After the success of Black Panther and Creed, he could say, hey, I have an idea that's going to cost a lot of money, but it's a big action movie with vampires. Maybe people will come see it. And lo and behold, he's an amazing filmmaker, so they do.
So a lot of your pieces about music. You talked to Ted Gioia. As we said, Ted Gioia is a guy who writes a very influential Substack called The Honest Broker. I have the cheapskate version of a subscription to that, so I miss a lot of things. Interestingly, after you went to Texas to interview him and you wrote your piece, he did write another whole big Substack kind of dealing with how his views were depicted there and maybe feeling a little bit defensive of them. But one thing I found fascinating, and if you haven't done it, go back and read the comments on that piece. His readers are such interesting people. And they made a whole bunch of interesting points, but one of them I'd love to bounce off you. Somebody said, I'm also struck by how little artistic rebellion there is. In fact, I haven't seen any true generation of rebel musicians since grunge. Maybe I'm just out of touch, but another negative effect of everybody being online too much is deference to the previous generation of artists. I love old music, I really do, but et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was thinking about that idea of rebellion. I mean, you could certainly argue that an awful lot of hip hop is rebellion.
Yeah.
But that kind of truth to power thing, it's an interesting point because I think right now we need culture to be especially vibrant and strong. The NEA is either going to be gutted or eliminated, or just one by one grants are going to be reverse cherry picked away. We're gonna need a very robust artistic community. I hope they're not feeling cowed by all of this.
I agree. I think it's harder to identify the rebellious element in culture. As someone who grew up in the 90s and everything cool was quote unquote alternative, we feel pretty far away from that now, though that might be changing a little bit just the past year or two. I think about somebody like Chappell Roan, who's making, very mainstream broad tent pop, but she's out and out queer, and she is saying all sorts of things in interviews that are not advisable to say. She spurned the Biden White House and said she wouldn't perform because of policies in Gaza, really. And, there are some examples of people who are not playing by the celebrity rule book quite as much as they were maybe a few years ago when it seemed like everything was Taylor Swift and her imitators just trying to be the perfect A student. I think about someone like Charlie XCX, who's making kind of this punkish, brash music about, doing what you want, being a brat. It's not necessarily politically reactive or revolutionary, but there is, I think, still an appetite for that feeling of rebellion. And then if you dig under the surface, just as you're saying, hip hop, and also a lot of these internet native micro genres that are bubbling up that I read about in the piece, they have more of a punkish streak for sure.
Yes, I've actually rewatched recently. I think either you or Joya mentioned it, The Decline of Civilization, the Penelope Spheris things that look back to the sort of the real beginnings of punk. And what's interesting about that too is, because it's punk, there's an incredible spirit of rebellion, not a hyper specific, spirit of rebellion. Like what they're upset about is less clear at times.
That's right. I mean, that scene kind of comes out of a feeling of economic burnout, right? Of being just totally unable to achieve the middle class American dream that you were promised. And I know a lot of people have that similar sense of disillusionment and feeling frustrated by the society they live in right now. But I don't think that people who are feeling that way are congregating in burned out warehouses and DIY venues like they were in the 80s. And so maybe that's part of the reason why we don't have these sort of punkish scenes bubbling up quite as much as we used to.
Yeah, partly because we don't have scenes. I mean, I think that is one of the things that's being starved out a little bit. There's just, stuff that was downtown went to Brooklyn, and so then Brooklyn got too expensive. And I mean, there aren't really those kinds of scenes that have generated so much. I mean, go back to, Vienna pre-World War I or something. I mean, there always have been seeds where people got together and created stuff. I think that's gone. But Spencer, I do also have a question or a thought about this, which is, like, you've got some very disturbing statistics about what percentage of music that is listened to on streaming services is "quote unquote" old. I think the boundary is maybe 18 months or something. I mean, you throw that out there, but then let's talk about that too.
Yeah, so this is a number that Ted Joy likes to cite a lot, which is that 75% of music being consumed right now is "quote unquote" catalog music, meaning it's older than 18 months. And the number keeps getting "quote unquote" worse every year. So new music comprises a smaller and smaller slice of the pie. I went into this piece having some skepticism about what that meant and how much we should extrapolate from it. In previous eras, when we listened to our parents' record collections, or even listened to our own favorite records that were 2 or 3 or 10 years old, it wasn't being monitored and logged and counted as a music consumption statistic. Repeat listening was never counted by anyone until streaming came along. And so that gives us a different picture of music consumption, and the way that we just measure popularity now is very different from how it used to be. But I do think that there's some very real signs that new music has to compete with old music in a way that didn't happen before. You have old hits like Kate Bush's "Running Up That Hill" surging to the top of the charts kind of out of nowhere from a placement in a TV show. And you have private equity firms and record labels spending hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire the publishing rights to classic catalogs, presumably because they feel like they can monetize them in a way that wasn't possible before. They were undervalued in the marketplace before something shifted to make them more valuable now.
Yeah, and I am chilled by all of that. I was listening to you and Derek Thompson talk about this, and it made me nervous. On the other hand, I think there's sort of a prior that's never been worked out here. And the prior is, what's a healthy relationship with music? I would argue that a healthy relationship of music includes, no matter what age you are right now, some interest in the American songbook, some interest in maybe early rock and roll, some interest in classical music, either from the distant past or contemporary. You should know who Caroline Shaw is, and on and on and on, you should listen to some country music. I mean, those numbers are alarming to me. On the other hand, I think there has been sort of a fetishization of currency, of the most current thing, for decades and decades now, that tended to crowd out anything that had come before. And I don't think that's healthy either.
I think I generally agree with you. But I think that a healthy culture creates a sense of something to look forward to, a sense of progression, a sense that you're living in a society that's moving forward and has a future. And so when there theoretically would come a point at which it would be unhealthy to focus on the catalog so much. And if younger people are growing up and becoming way more interested in music of decades ago than the music that's being created today, it seems to be a warning light at the very least. But that's not necessarily happening in every case, but it's happening for some people.
Yeah. One of the big pull quotes from your piece is a Joya quote where he says that if Bach were alive today, he'd spend a few weeks trying to break into the LA music scene and say, I'll be a hedge fund manager instead, which is a little glib. Like, I don't know, maybe Bach would get on TikTok with his brothers, and do some cool stuff. And, maybe all of his brothers, they're all named Johann something too. It's weird. But, maybe Johann Jakob was a pretty funny guy. And then maybe, Johann Sebastian Bach, Tina Fey has him score her new series or something. I mean, I think people who are talented, I don't agree with Joya about that. I think people who are talented who have something that they want to say, they find a way to do it. Now, whether they're positively remunerated, about whether they're, discovered by the right audiences, that's a separate question. But I don't buy the idea that people get beaten down so much that Chapel Roan could very easily have not made it.
Yes.
So anyway, your thoughts there.
I think I agree. This idea that artists will become too discouraged to create. There's something to it, but it flies in the face of so many historical examples of artists who did their best work in circumstances of utter deprivation and obscurity. Someone like Chapel Roan really had to hustle and fight for years and years to get to where she is today, and really until a year or two ago, it seemed like she wasn't going to make it, but she kept going. So we have a lot of stories like that. I mean, the idea that Bach would be on TikTok, does that not itself sound like an example of decline to you? I mean,
not necessarily. Look, TikTok, I'm 70 years old. What do I know about TikTok? Except that I am on TikTok. Yeah. And look, we know, for example, that Book Talk has excited people, not even just about recent releases by Sally Rooney, but about the classics. We know that there was a Middlemarch craze on Substack in the last 18 months or so. I mean, the fact that these new forms exist, and they do cater to short attention spans, and the releases of neurochemicals, and rapid fire, that doesn't mean they're incapable of doing good. And I think, in some ways you have to sort of give them a chance. Obviously, TikTok and YouTube, they're going to eat everything and rule over us, but maybe that's not as terrible a thing as it could be.
No, I mean, there's so much amazing creativity that's pouring out of TikTok and YouTube as well. And that is part of why people are obsessed with it. It's not just the dopamine thing. It's seeing people, like really talented musicians, playing a song in their shower and then suddenly like blowing up because they have this voice that no one's heard before, or just hilarious comedians, things like that. That really is a hive of creativity. And I think in some ways this is maybe like one of the more creative moments in cultural history. It's just that nothing can really, very few things can create the kind of conversation and coherent cultural scene that we come to expect from greatness in previous generations. And when I think about TikTok, I think, yes, it's definitely a place where creative things are happening. If you point a gun at my head and say, okay, show me a TikTok that is like legendary and like a masterpiece and can stand up to the great works of art of previous generations, I would have some trouble doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's more a question of what does TikTok point you toward, and it may play a more benign and even useful role there. And actually, another thing that's really important, honestly, not just to polish your apple, is people like you. I mean, we really need a lot of people writing about this stuff and writing about the arts. We need really good critics because a lot of this engagement has to come. We have to hear it from other people. It's too overwhelming for everybody to figure it out totally on their own. So on that laudatory note, Spencer Kornhaber, staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of On Divas, Persona, Pleasure, and Power. I do also want to recommend that everybody else seek out the piece. Is this the worst ever era of American pop culture? Make up your own mind about it. You can write to me at colin@ctpublic.org. Tell me what you think anyway. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We are going to talk to some nose panelists about the same thing. That's Jade Bird and Miramasa. I gotta be the only 70-year-old man walking around the park singing Burn the Hard Drive to myself. But one of the things we're trying to do with the music on the episode today is just use music that we've already used this year by artists we think are really interesting. And we are also going to talk to some people right now whom we think are very interesting as well. They are Nose panelists. Taneisha Duggan is Director of Arts, Culture, and Entertainment for the City of Hartford. Xandra Ellin is a producer at Pineapple Street Studios. Well, she also, it's not here in the introduction, but let me see if I can do it from memory. How Can I Make This About Me? Is that the name of your Substack?
That's right, yeah.
I am a subscriber to that Substack. Bill Yousman, Professor of Media Studies at Sacred Heart University. So I'm just going to maybe have all of you react one by one to where we've gone so far with this conversation. And Taneisha, why don't you get us started? What's your overall take on this whole idea of pop culture decline?
Well, it's funny. I think the thing that I picked up the most, because I'm a mom of two young boys, was Disney being woke. And I was like, really? The place is too expensive. like you can go to much better experiences that really give your kids sort of high culture and a lived experience they can't get anywhere else for cheaper than a trip to Disney. But that is not the point of our Disney call out. It was more to the effect of the stuff that they create. And, I think we're in a weird time where the folks who are decision makers are now me. I think we were blessed enough to live in a time where things were pretty okay. And so the stuff that we made was I'm not a kid of the 90s, but even then, grunge against what? So am I a nihilist? No, I think that there's something beautiful happening under the surface. My question is, how long will it remain under the surface, all things considered, particularly in America, where I think things are just going underground because of necessity.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that because I want to get into that a little bit more, but let's just hear from the rest of the panel. Xandra, how about you? Just give us wherever your thoughts are going right now.
Yeah, I really appreciated the conversation that you had with Spencer, and I appreciated the kind of like caveating around just like, we don't want to be like poo-pooing the current generation, whatever. But I think it's I am really struggling to grapple with this question of just because I found myself really, really hating a lot of the pop culture that's come out lately. And I am not the same person I was when I first came on this show when I was 21 years old and was evangelizing Selena Gomez, and culture was effectively orienting itself around me as a 21-year-old person. And so I have found myself over the last several years really grappling with this question of, do I hate it because it's actually bad, or do I hate it because it's no longer for me, right? Which feels like an existential question that I'm excited to get more into.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When you say it, like, can you, top of mind, just think of an example or two of stuff that you hate but you're not quite sure why?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much. I think I'm thinking about like, there's a new artist called Tu Hollis that is like this kind of new glitch pop artist, sort of working in the kind of tradition of 100 gecs, which was still sort of like, that was something I could kind of get on board with. And now it's just, it's at this point where I'm like, this is just not for me any longer. And I don't know if culture will ever be back to being for me.
Right.
And that
I was not even aware of glitch pop, let alone anything else you were. But
unfortunately,
that's good. Yeah, it's good.
That's what we're doing now.
Yeah. And so, Bill Yousman, how about you? Where are you on this?
So I have to admit that I kind of am an anti-presentist. And what I mean by that is I always get really skeptical about any arguments that frame any particular time as either the worst time ever, as Kornhaber, he's not making that argument, but he's talking to people who do, or the best time ever, because I think we can get way too caught up in the moment and we can forget about all of the previous eras, and we can romanticize when it comes to, saying this is the worst. And we remember the great movies and books and music and theater from previous eras because it was great. We've forgotten that there was always a lot of garbage in culture, that culture is always this, giant, landfill that you have to sift through to find the things that are worthwhile. And then hopefully they will sustain. They don't always. There are certainly such as a thing as overlooked masterpieces. There have certainly been people who have been neglected and ignored by mass culture, pop culture, because they didn't fit into mainstream identities or mainstream politics, but I think that I really firmly believe that there is great culture being made every single day, and that you just have to kind of look for it a little bit. Don't let the algorithm dictate what you do, but find other ways to try to seek it out yourself.
Yeah, and Taneisha, I want to go back to the idea too of what's underground right now and what needs to be above ground. I mean, this is a moment that screams out for artistic response, and to some degree, I've seen it. But really, from 2017 going forward, it's really weird. It's like a lot of it has been sort of offshored to, SNL Weekend Update and Jimmy Kimmel's monologue. And I'm the kind. It was kind of interesting in this past season of White Lotus. There was one tiny little moment where these three women who were at this resort in Thailand, and it turned out that two of them figured out that the third one had voted for Trump, and they had kind of a conversation about that. But I mean, it was pretty mild compared to probably what you're talking about being underground.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm circling around is that while a lot of things have been fun, they've lacked meaning, and I think that we just had a time where we could just have fun, I mean, I'd be hard pressed, Bill, to pull, yes, some of Michael Jackson's greatest work was happening in the 80s. And that we are feeling and hearing a resurgence of 80s sounds in the music of today. But as a sort of general time period, I'm not exactly looking to that as an abundant time of deep, rich, meaningful art. I do think that we're going to see that kind of stuff happen now, and I don't think we can find it. I think it's to me, Xandra, I feel like you, I don't know if I'll get a chance to experience it as it's being made. I'm trying to find the ways to get there and to get inside of it. But I think it's for, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, and while they have come up in a time that is, to your point, Bill, attached to the algorithm, I'm actually finding that highly curated life that they've been sharing with folks is not an indicator of the life they're actually living. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that's happening that we're just not seeing because they are actually living and then selling us a story of their brand for the sake of work, right? For the sake of being a productive worker bee, and not necessarily this is how I'm living, which is how we all used Friendster and MySpace and all of those things nobody remembers anymore.
Yeah, I don't know, Bill, did you want to react to that? So she mentioned you.
No, yeah. I just think it's an intriguing idea that Taneisha alludes to, that the culture that we are posting online is not necessarily the culture that is really speaking to us the most. I just found that to be an intriguing idea.
Yeah, and I mean, Xandra, among us, you are, I think, sort of the true digital native. I mean, you've kind of not known a world that wasn't govern
Not
the
me.
not you at all. You're a native. You're a native of some other kind.
Analog
Yeah,
native.
The papyrus.
and I wonder. I mean, so an awful lot of the critique that Kornhaber and other people have made is just that in fact, in an attention economy that's run on seconds and milliseconds, you're creating an audience that is unable to sustain attention and make good decisions about art. I don't know how fair, Xandra, do you think that is on behalf of your entire generation?
No pressure.
I think it's pretty fair. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, of course, but something that I've been thinking about a lot is that in my kind of like circles and communities, we're really interested in these new apps that I've been calling them public consumption logs, but it's basically like a forum, like a Letterboxd or a Goodreads or something to post about the things that you're consuming. I would also consider like going to a play and posting a picture of the playbill, sort of like a similar instinct. There's this way in which all consumption has to be made utile or productive. And the way that we do that is by sharing it, but not in the way that sharing art used to be. Like we used to share art in the sense that you would go to a concert with your friend, and now you share it in the sense that you post it. And I think that I find that a little bit problematic in the sense that it imbues the experience of consuming art, or it removes from the experience of consuming art any inherent justification for being. You sort of have to like work to justify consuming art by turning it into something else. Don't quite know how to explain it.
No,
but
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
That there is sort of the thing that you're watching, and then the moment that you take a picture of yourself, next to the marquee or whatever it is.
I was really fascinated, for instance, this year or like last year, there was this whole scandal because all of these young people were going to see Wicked and they were taking pictures of it and videos of it on their phone in the theater, and people got so irate. And I was like, I do understand why you would get irate, but doesn't this just feel like the logical conclusion of a culture where we like go to a museum and take pictures of all the art at the museum or log a movie after we watch it?
Well,
you're speaking to the thing that made me so crazy in my past life. I want to quickly say, just to your point, Xandra, Colin, you talked about reading the comment section as like an appendix to your experience. And I actually think there's something about the comment section as culture for us now. It's the place, I think, where we are getting a kind of self-curation, but are also getting to like understand where people are. That was really revelatory in a strange way for me, of like, oh yeah, the comment section is where people are living and breathing these days. And that's new.
Can I also just say that, Taneisha, particularly in your new role as the culture czar of Hartford, the last time you were on, we were talking about, I had been to see the Hartford Symphony doing the Terence Blanchard presentation where he was on stage there. I was amazed by the degree to which, and I don't mean this is going to sound a little bit critical, and maybe it is a little bit critical, the degree to which the Hartford Symphony Orchestra had just decided to cave to phones. And they had sort of said, look, take pictures and stuff like that. You can't record any of the music, but we'd love to have you get your phones out and take pictures. And then they said, if you want to follow the libretti, and then Carolyn Kwan, our beloved conductor, she got down on her hands and knees and showed with her phone how to take a picture of a QR code in the program so you could look up the libretto while you were watching the Terence Blanchard. And I was thinking, no. Make us look at the stage. That is the idea of what you're doing right now. Make us look at the stage. Whatever you want us to see, put it up on the stage. But Taneisha, I worried that I'm kind of a dinosaur roaring here saying that.
I don't think you are. I think we're at this tension point between like the possibility of technology and its inherent isolationism, right? Like, because it's very expensive to be able to put those lyrics on the stage, to like do a projection mapping of what you're hearing so that you can both watch what's happening on TV and have an artistic representation of the words for you to read, right? Like that's an expensive and imaginative proposition. I don't think you're wrong in being like, is there a place between this technology that we're married to and something else? And also, I think our job is in the spaces in the humanities, art and culture, is to reconnect us to human beings, right? And so I appreciate the call out, although I have a deep dislike for the fact that commercial theater and theaters can't quite figure out how to include the digital natives.
We could have helped them. I mean, I really think that, a few of us could have helped them with that. But, Bill, I also feel as though this is an odd conversation to be having in a year where the first 5 months have produced, at minimum, Sinners and Adolescence on streaming television. That's two really incredibly exciting things, and it's not June yet. Again, that sort of makes me think, wow, in this horrible, swampy, stagnant environment, it's apparently still possible to do some pretty cool stuff.
It certainly is. And, that's really kind of, where I'm arguing. And, even if we go back, so I feel like what are they really talking about here? They're talking about like the 2020s, right? So in getting ready for this show, I started to look at some of the culture that I've really enjoyed that's been made in the 2020s. And the list I came up with was just huge. Like, I'm not going to bore everybody with like the whole list, but just to offer a few as like some specifics. Musicians like Robert Glasper or Micaiah McCraven, who are jazz musicians who also bring in soul and funk and hip hop. People like someone I know that you like a lot, Colin, Cassandra Jenkins, or in movies, directors like Bong Joon-ho, Greta Gerwig, Christopher Nolan, Jordan Peele, Ryan Coogler, Sarah Polley, Jonathan Glazer. Like, I could just go on and on and on, which is part of what I react against when I start hearing these arguments that, and I don't know if maybe a couple of the people that Kornhaber interviewed were getting close to making this argument, but that nothing good is happening, or there isn't great stuff being made, or there aren't really exciting and interesting artists working all the time. I just don't think that's a empirically sustainable argument.
I think we all agree the problem isn't with the artist. It's maybe with the distribution.
Consumption is the other side, right?
Yeah, consumption is the other side of the attention span of the audience and stuff like that. All right, we got to go to a break just so you guys have a chance to make some recommendations. So let's do that break, and we'll be right back.
She still want to know one more thing. What's really going on? She want to get me on the phone. Where the fit come from? It's a mystery. I mean, really, I don't know. She went through hellish on. She want to play a couple songs. I want to know what I need you for. I want to know what I need you for.
Isn't this all the same? When I heard her complain, she say, I want to know what I need you for. Baby, tell me what I need you for. I know you do. What do I got to prove? Because I want to know. Baby, I want to know you too.
Today's show has the usual number of thank yous. Dylan Reyes is our technical producer, the maestro. He and I spent a lot of time talking about the music that we use on this show in a way that's, I think, relevant today. Jonathan McPants is, as usual, the producer of this episode. We have lots of other people stopping us here, including the wonderful Robin Doyen-Aiken and Meg Fitzgerald. Thanks to everything they do over the course of a week, too. So let's get some recommendations from this fine panel. Xandra, Ellin, why don't you go first?
Sure. As I was thinking about this, I was planning on recommending, ironically, an album that came out in October, which I felt might kind of adhere to the theme of no good music is coming out, which is Cameron Winter's heavy metal. If you already know.
I love him. I really do.
I was going to say, if you haven't listened to it, you need to listen to it specifically. Yeah. If anybody else hasn't, you should as well. But then I heard something that Kornhaber said in your interview, which was a healthy society means you have something to look forward to, which really kind of I latched onto that. And so I wanted to recommend looking forward to 3 pop girly albums that are coming out this summer, which is Lord's new album, Kesha's new album, remember her, and Addison Rae's new album. So those are 3 things I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. No, Cameron Winter is like, I don't know, he's like Leonard Cohen, except he's like a new Leonard Cohen. Anyway,
Agree.
We only got about 4 minutes left here. Taneisha Duggan, what are you going to recommend to us?
So my recommendations aren't actually rooted in what I think this conversation is about, and it's about transcendence over time, not necessarily great for the moment, but something that we're going to see 20, 30, 50 years and still be talking about. I'm not talking about any of those things. I'm endorsing Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco's newest album, I Said I Love You First and You Said It Back. There's this song, Scared of Loving You, and a video that they do together that's on Vivo on YouTube that is just so lovely. And because I'm really excited and invested in local folks who are making world impressioned work, just received a copy of The Emperor of Gladness. I have not read it yet, but I have to shout out Ocean Vuong as a Hartford region artist and star.
All right. And Bill Yousman, how about you?
Sticking with this theme that there's still really great stuff being made, but it is on us to find it and to appreciate it. Two novels that have come out just in 2019 and 2024, both by an author named Claire Lombardo. The first one is called The Most Fun We Ever Had, and the second one is called Same as It Ever Was. Those are her only two novels so far. They're these big, thick novels about family dynamics that sprawl across multiple characters and across decades. Some people have compared her to Jonathan Franzen, but I think she actually has a lighter touch and doesn't take herself quite as seriously or earnestly as he does.
How could she? How could she take herself that seriously?
Well, true. I devoured both of them, and in terms of what Xandra was saying about looking forward, I can't wait to see what this author does next.
Yeah. Cameron Winter, by the way, if you're going to listen to one song, listen to the Rolling Stones. I mean, there's actually a song called The Rolling Stones. And it actually shows you, first of all, how connected he is to the whole history of everything and how incredibly original his mind is. But no, I'm so glad that Xandra recommended him. He's terrific. I'm going to recommend, in general, Julianne Nicholson, and specifically a series on Hulu called Paradise that she and Sterling Brown and some other people did. It's a really interesting look at kind of survivalism for hyper-rich people. And it's got all kinds of interesting take. Also, James Marsden plays the president in the United States, and he's obsessed with 80s culture and 80s and 90s rock and roll and Die Hard movies and stuff. And the whole thing is really brilliantly done.
Soundtrack for that show is stunning.
Yes. And then Julianne Nicholson is also appearing in Hacks right now. I think Hacks explores modern culture so intelligently. The most recent episode was kind of a clunker. I didn't think it really worked. But by and large, that whole collision between old school and woke is handled in a very generous, smart, affectionate, loving way, and it's also very, very funny. They're doing a great job. And Julianne Nicholson's got a short run right now as Dance Mom, a middle-aged TikTok sensation who's on late-night television. All right, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks to this wonderful panel, to Taneisha, Xandra, and Bill. Thanks to my group here, and we'll be back next week.
Oh, yeah. Talk about Torrington, Vernon, Danbury, Waterbury, Alderberry, Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah. On the rail.